One of the songs that helped to put him right up in the top in the recording business is one that's very appropriate to the weather that we've been having practically all over the country. Friends, here is a young boy by the name of Johnny Horton.
Can your greatest fear become reality? Well, Johnny Horton mysteriously predicted the exact way he would die years before it happened. By 1960, the country music star had reached incredible success with 3 #1 songs on the country music charts, and his hit, Battle of New Orleans, reaching the Billboard Top 100. However, his rising career came to a sudden halt when he died at the hands of a drunk driver. How can a great singer just die during his prime? Was it just his predictions, or it was something mysterious? In this video, we'll find out. Come along. Johnny Horton, mystery finally solved. Johnny Horton had always carried a strange and haunting feeling deep within him, one that most people around him brushed off as superstition or the result of too much overthinking. But could it really be just paranoia when a man insists over and over again that he's going to die at the hands of a drunk driver? Horton wasn't vague about it either. This wasn't a passing thought or a distant fear. It was something he spoke about constantly, something that visibly shaped his behavior. He told his friends and family directly, not once or twice, but repeatedly, that he believed a drunk driver would one day be the cause of his death. And this belief wasn't some dramatic show. It ran so deep that it guided how he lived his life. For instance, he avoided bars like they were cursed ground, even when he was scheduled to perform in one. If the venue had a bar, he'd stay tucked away in his dressing room rather than risk mingling with the crowd, all because he truly believed that one wrong encounter with a drunk could be the end of him. Now, how many performers do you know who try to cancel their own gigs because of an uneasy feeling in their gut? Horton did, more than once. And when it came to his final show at the Skyline Club in Austin, Texas, the same place where Hank Williams Sr. gave his last performance, Horton tried once again to bow out. But he couldn't. Commitments had been made, and perhaps, somewhere deep down, he knew it would be the last one. What really happened to Johnny Horton? The truth has been hidden for years, but now that the mystery is finally solved, it's not the story fans were hoping for. Was it an accident or something darker? Stick around, because the ending will change how you see everything. Just a week before that fateful night, Horton handed his guitar to his friend and fellow musician, Merl Kilgore. What he said while doing so has stayed with Kilgore ever since. "I've got the feeling old John's not gonna be around much longer." Who says something like that casually? The eerie part isn't just in the way Horton predicted his own end. It's how closely his story parallels that of Hank Williams Sr. It almost feels like a script written with eerie precision. Think about this. Both men performed their final shows at the exact same venue. They both died shortly after those performances. Even more bizarre, they were both married to the same woman, Billie Jean Jones, at the time of their deaths. Horton, in fact, first heard about Hank Williams's death while driving past a quiet Texas town called Milano. It gave him chills. He spoke about it. And where would Horton end up dying years later? The very same place, Milano, Texas. It's hard to wrap your head around. Can all of that really be coincidence? On the night of November 4th, 1960, after finishing his show at the Skyline Club, Horton loaded up his white Cadillac with gear and hit the road with his bass player Tillman Franks riding shotgun and his manager Tommy Tomlinson in the back seat. Franks would later recall that Horton was driving faster than usual, almost like something was chasing him, or maybe he just wanted to outrun a fate he already knew was coming. But fate caught up with him near Milano, right on Highway 79. A pickup truck driven by James Evan Davis, a man later found to be drunk, had already smashed into both sides of a bridge before veering into Horton's lane and slamming head-on into the Cadillac. The crash was brutal. Horton didn't die instantly. He was still breathing when they pulled him from the wreckage, and there must have been a few moments, just a few, where hope lingered in the air. But he never made it to the hospital. He died on the way. Franks survived with a serious head injury, and Tomlinson's legs were crushed so badly they later had to be amputated. Meanwhile, Davis, the drunk driver, suffered only minor injuries. Can you imagine that? The man who caused it all, the one Horton had spent years dreading, walked away from the crash. And justice, if you can even call it that, it was almost non-existent. Davis didn't serve a single day in prison. He pleaded no contest to the charge of murder without malice and was given a 2-year suspended sentence. That was it. A man's life had ended, 2 others permanently injured, a family devastated, and the one who caused it all walked free. Echoes of a voice that shaped a nation. Even after Johnny Horton's sudden and heartbreaking death, people just couldn't stop talking about him or playing his music. It's as if his voice refused to be silenced, echoing through jukeboxes, radios, and hearts across America. One of the most powerful reminders of this was his final recording, North to Alaska. Released after he was already gone, the song didn't just chart, it soared, hitting #1 on the country charts. Isn't it something how a man could leave the world and yet still climb to the top of it? That bittersweet success made many wonder what else he might have achieved had he lived. Friends and fans alike would often say it was like hearing a ghost sing, not in a spooky way, but in a way that made your skin tingle with emotion. He was gone, and yet he wasn't. People didn't stop there. They didn't just listen, they honored him. In 1961, Horton received a Grammy Award for Battle of New Orleans in the Best Country and Western Performance category. It was a big deal, but if you ask most people who loved him, they'd probably tell you that his biggest and most meaningful recognition came in 1965, when he was inducted into the Louisiana Music Hall of Fame. Why? Because that was home. That was the place where his songs first found roots. And to see his name etched there meant his music had officially become part of the cultural fabric of the state. But his legacy wasn't just in trophies and plaques. The real mark of his greatness was found in the hearts and voices of other artists. Johnny Cash, George Strait, and a long list of country legends said his name with deep respect. They grew up with his sound in their ears and carried it into their own careers. Isn't that one of the highest honors an artist can receive? To become part of the next artist's foundation? And then there's something truly unique about Johnny Horton that makes him stand out even more. He taught history through song. Imagine that, learning about America's past not from a boring textbook, but from a guitar-strumming storyteller who could make a centuries-old war sound like it happened just down the road. The Battle of New Orleans was more than just a hit. It was a mini-history lesson disguised as a toe-tapping anthem. Kids and adults alike sang along, many of them learning about the War of 1812 for the first time. Horton's ability to weave historical facts with catchy lyrics was downright genius. He brought old battles, forgotten explorers, and gold rush tales back to life. His song, Sink the Bismarck, pulled listeners right into the thick of World War II naval combat. North to Alaska captured the wild hopes and rugged dreams of the gold rush era. He had a way of making history feel personal. And let's be honest, how many musicians can you say actually made you want to learn something? But beyond the clever storytelling and the honors and the chart-topping singles, what makes Johnny Horton's music still matter today? Why are people still playing his songs all these years later? It might be because he sang with such raw honesty. You could feel his roots, his honky-tonk, southern grit every time he opened his mouth. He wasn't trying to be fancy. He wasn't trying to impress. He was just telling you a story, plain and simple, and somehow that made it even more powerful. His themes were universal: adventure, loss, pride, danger, love of country, and they still hit home. And then there's the haunting detail that makes people pause. He predicted his own death. Close friends swore he had a feeling something bad was coming. And when that fatal car crash happened in 1960, it left an eerie chill in the air. That tragic ending has only deepened the mystery surrounding him. People don't just listen to his music, they lean in, curious, wondering who this man really was and what he might have become. So, Johnny Horton didn't just leave behind a few hit songs. He left behind a legacy stitched into the soundtrack of American life. He was the kind of artist who sang the past into the present, and somehow, even in death, stayed in tune with the future. And when people hear his voice now, strong, twangy, full of heart, they're not just listening to country music, they're hearing history. They're hearing a man who, against all odds, still has something to say. Isn't that the kind of legacy every artist dreams of? But to understand why his voice still resonates so deeply, you have to go back to where it all started. His beginnings weren't glamorous, but they shaped everything. Let's step into Johnny Horton's early years, and as we do, stay with us till the very end, because once you see where he came from, you'll never hear his songs the same way again. Johnny Horton's early years. John Gale Horton, born on April 30th, 1925 in Los Angeles, California, came into a world that never quite stayed still for too long. From the very beginning, his life was marked by a kind of restlessness that would follow him like a shadow. His family moved constantly between California and Texas, always chasing the promise of better days, of more stable jobs, and maybe, just maybe, a place to finally call home. Johnny, as he was affectionately called, grew up in this back-and-forth rhythm. One day he was soaking up the sun on the West Coast, the next he was surrounded by the red dirt and open skies of Texas. What kind of childhood is that for a kid? One with suitcases half unpacked, new schools every few months, and friendships that felt fleeting before they even began. Yet somehow, through all this shifting ground, Johnny managed to find his footing. He grew up developing a unique bond with both states. California gave him a glimpse of modernity and change, while Texas grounded him in tradition and grit. His father's work, often unstable, meant the family never really settled down until they eventually planted their roots in the quiet town of Rusk, Texas. That's where Johnny managed to catch his breath. There, he attended school more consistently and began to show signs of someone who was going places, even if he didn't know where just yet. People remembered him as polite, a bit reserved, but always carrying this quiet confidence, like he knew something they didn't. He wasn't the loudest in the room, but he was the one people watched. For a time, it seemed like baseball would be his ticket out. Johnny had a natural talent that caught the attention of more than just his coaches. He could hit, he could field, and he played with a passion that made people sit up and take notice. It was enough to earn him a scholarship to Kilgore Junior College in Texas, a huge step for a young man who had spent most of his life on the move. College life was simple and satisfying. He was known for his talent on the field, and while he was plenty smart, his focus was always more on sports than on books. Professors said he had potential, but Johnny had his eyes set on something else. Could anyone have predicted that music, of all things, would come knocking? At that point, music was just background noise, a fun distraction, nothing more. But then came the injury. A serious one. One minute he was rounding bases and thinking about a future in the big leagues, and the next he was lying on his back, dreams stalled. That injury was more than just physical, it hit his identity hard. Who was Johnny Horton if he wasn't a baseball player? As it turned out, the answer to that question would change the course of his life. While recovering, he went on a fishing trip in Florida. Just a quiet, simple escape. Nothing dramatic. But sometimes, the most ordinary days plant the biggest seeds. Sitting by the water, with nothing but time and pain on his hands, he started singing. Maybe it was out of boredom. Maybe it was to chase away the disappointment. Either way, people around him took notice. They told him he had something, a voice that stopped people, made them feel something. Was it possible that all this time, the music had been waiting in the wings, quietly nudging him toward a different stage? That idea stuck with him. Back home, he bought a guitar, nothing fancy, and started teaching himself. No lessons, no coach, just determination. And day by day, his fingers learned the strings, and his voice learned how to carry emotion. His songs weren't just songs, they were stories. Tales of places he'd been, people he'd watched, and feelings he couldn't quite say out loud, unless they were wrapped in melody. By the time the 1940s were winding down, Johnny had transformed, not just from athlete to musician, but from someone unsure of where he belonged to someone who was finally carving out his own space. He started performing at small venues, pouring his heart into country music. Why country? Because it spoke the same language he did. Songs about longing, about never quite fitting in, about searching for something that always seems just out of reach. Those were his songs. And when he sang them, people listened. Really listened. Johnny Horton didn't just become a musician. He became a storyteller. And all those years of moving, of uncertainty, of starting over, they gave him the raw material to write lyrics that meant something. His career was only beginning, but even then, there was a sense that he was tapping into something deep and true. His voice wasn't just singing tunes, it was giving life to the kind of feelings people didn't always know how to put into words. And that, more than any baseball scholarship or classroom grade, was the beginning of something unforgettable. The making of a saga singer. When Johnny Horton stepped off that stage after winning a local talent contest, hosted by none other than Jim Reeves, something inside him shifted. Until then, music had been a passion, a comfort, maybe even a dream. But now, it became a real possibility. That win wasn't just about applause or bragging rights. It was the beginning of something far greater. It gave him the push he needed to take his music seriously, to chase a career that would eventually make his name known in homes across America. Early on, he took on the nickname the Singing Fisherman, a charming nod to his time in the cold, rugged waters of Alaska, where he'd spent time working and reflecting. It was a simple label, but it made him relatable. Who doesn't love a man who works hard, sings from the heart, and fishes in his spare time? By 1951, things began to pick up. Horton found himself with regular radio and TV gigs out in Los Angeles, an exciting shift for a man who had only recently traded fishing rods for microphones. He landed a spot on KXLA radio and even hosted his own half-hour segment in Pasadena, continuing to use his Singing Fisherman moniker. Horton also made guest appearances on Hometown Jamboree, the country music variety show hosted by Cliffy Stone, which was a huge opportunity for any up-and-coming artist. That same year, he inked a deal with Corman Records, but just as it seemed things were gaining momentum, the label folded. 10 singles recorded, and almost all of them lost in the shuffle. Would this be the end of the road for Johnny Horton? Not even close. Instead of sulking over the setback, he did what any determined dreamer would do. He packed his bags and headed to Texas. There, he returned to basics, performing at talent contests, small-town bars, and grabbing whatever radio airtime he could. Wasn't that the beauty of the American music dream? That even in dusty corners of forgotten towns, a voice could still be heard, and a star could still be born? His grit and persistence paid off when he caught the attention of Faber Robinson, a notable music impresario who helped him land even more radio and television appearances. Horton wasn't just singing anymore, he was learning, writing his own songs, tweaking his style, getting feedback from crowds both big and small. He was shaping himself into an artist with staying power. Then came a pivotal chapter: Louisiana. In late 1951, Horton moved to Shreveport, where he became a regular on Louisiana Hayride. Now, if Grand Ole Opry was the crown jewel of country music, Louisiana Hayride was its secret weapon. Broadcast from the Shreveport Municipal Auditorium and powered by the booming 50,000-watt KWKH station, this show didn't just play in the South. It stretched all the way to Chicago and Los Angeles. This meant Johnny's voice was now echoing far beyond local taverns and fishing towns. They called it the Cradle of the Stars for a reason. Elvis Presley, Hank Williams, and many others had gotten their big break here. For Horton, this was more than a gig. It was a gateway. During this time, he formed a new backing band called the Roadrunners, with Jerry Rowley on fiddle, Evelyn Rowley on piano, and Vera Dido handling guitars. This team helped bring his songs to life and added polish to his increasingly professional performances. But by 1955, Horton was starting to feel stuck again. His music wasn't catching fire the way he hoped, so he turned to bassist Tillman Franks, a fellow Hayride performer. At first, Franks wasn't interested in managing anyone, but something about Horton changed his mind. And thank goodness it did, because this was the partnership that shifted everything. Franks knew what the industry wanted, and he knew Horton had it in him to deliver. With Franks's help, Horton signed a deal with Columbia Records in 1956. That's when the transformation began. Horton's voice, once rooted in traditional country, started to lean into honky-tonk and rockabilly influences. They were watching Elvis Presley rise like a rocket, and Horton took note. Could he bring that same energy, but with his own twist? His first Columbia single, Honky Tonk Man, was recorded in Nashville on January 11, 1956, and by summer, it cracked the country top 10. The session lineup was stacked: Grady Martin, Harold Bradley, and even Bill Black, the legendary bassist for Elvis. Horton followed it with I'm a One-Woman Man, a song that Billboard praised as smart and polished. It was official. He had found his sound. What made Horton stand out was his ability to evolve. He could jump from the twang of honky-tonk to the sway of folk storytelling, and it never felt forced. His real breakthrough came in 1959 with When It's Springtime in Alaska, It's 40 Below, his first #1 hit on the country charts. That song set the tone for what would become his signature, saga songs. He wasn't just writing music anymore, he was telling stories. Real stories, epic stories, history lessons even, but with rhythm and soul. His journey was one of resilience, evolution, and storytelling. And isn't that what great music is all about? And that part of his journey? Well, that's where the story really hits home. Stay with us, because up next, we explore the man behind the music and the raw truth he carried in every verse. The man behind the music, love, faith, and fear. Behind all the legendary hits and epic storytelling ballads stood a man who was more than just a country music star. Johnny Horton was a man full of love, faith, and, perhaps most hauntingly, a deep, almost chilling awareness that his time on earth would be cut short. People around him noticed it. They talked about how he carried this sense of destiny with him like a shadow, not in a dramatic or attention-seeking way, but as someone who had quietly accepted a truth he couldn't shake. Off stage, away from the lights and cheering crowds, Horton wasn't living like a typical music celebrity of his era. He was a husband, a father, and a deeply spiritual man who tried his best to keep his life clean and purposeful even as his fame grew. One of the most fascinating and intimate parts of his life was his marriage to Billie Jean Jones, who herself carried the weight of country music history. She had been the young widow of Hank Williams Sr., yes, that Hank Williams, and married Horton just 9 months after Hank's death. Billie Jean was only 19 at the time. It wasn't just a romantic relationship, it was a blending of two legacies, two lives touched by tragedy and music. Together, they had 2 daughters, Yanina and Melody, and Horton also lovingly adopted Jerry Lynn, Billie Jean's daughter, from her previous marriage. People often ask, did Horton live in Hank's shadow? But by most accounts, their marriage wasn't about ghosts of the past. It was about building a new future. And yet, that future didn't come easy. There were tough times, especially financially. Horton was still climbing the ladder of success, and at one point, Billie Jean had just about had enough. As the story goes, she told him bluntly to get his ass out of the house and find a job. Harsh? Maybe, but that kind of tough love was exactly what lit the fire under him. And sure enough, things started to change when he teamed up with manager Tillman Franks. It was one of those turning points that you don't realize is huge until you look back and see how everything else began to fall into place afterward. Now let's talk about the man behind the music, not the performer, but the person. Johnny Horton stood out in a music scene that was full of hard drinking, smoking, and pill popping. He didn't do any of that. According to Billie Jean, he didn't even know about pills until he reached the top and saw what others in the industry were doing to cope. He was that clean. No vices, no self-destruction. Was it rare? Absolutely. Almost unheard of in those circles. And that's what made him different. He sang about commitment, love, and loyalty, not as empty lyrics, but as things he truly believed in. Songs like I'm a One-Woman Man weren't just catchy tunes. They were reflections of his own values. He didn't go around preaching, but his music often echoed the kind of grounded biblical ideals that were quietly guiding his personal life. But even with all that spiritual grounding and family love, there was something else constantly lingering in the background. Something darker. Horton had this unshakable belief that he would die young, and not just young, but in a very specific way. He told people, over and over, that he was going to be killed by a drunk driver. And it wasn't a casual fear like someone being nervous about flying. It was deep. It was serious. He told friends. He told family. And it spooked people. How do you comfort someone when they're convinced they've already seen their ending? He wasn't quiet about his spiritual side either, especially with his friend Johnny Cash. The two of them would go fishing and talk about things far beyond music. They even tried to contact Hank Williams' spirit through seances. Yes, seances. Can you imagine that? 2 country legends sitting in silence, trying to speak to a man already gone, as if they both knew how thin the line was between life and death. And just a week before his death, Horton tried to give away his guitar to songwriter Merl Kilgore. He told him plainly that he had a vision. He knew something was going to happen. And then it did. Everything he feared, everything he spoke about, came true. Horton died in a car crash, caused by a drunk driver, just like he'd said he would. It was one of those moments that hits people in the gut, because it feels like fate had been whispering in his ear the whole time, and he had been listening when nobody else could really hear. It leaves you wondering, did he somehow know? Was it intuition? Or something more? Johnny Horton's story is the kind that stays with you, not just because of the hits he left behind, but because of the life he lived quietly, almost prophetically, off stage. A man who loved hard, believed deeply, and somehow saw his own ending before it came. Isn't that the kind of story that makes you pause and think? Makes you wonder what you'd do if you saw your own future coming? Maybe that's why, even after all these years, his name still carries a certain weight, not just in music, but in mystery. But now, after years of silence, speculation, and unanswered questions, a major piece of his story has come to light, and it changes everything. The mystery that surrounded his final moments has finally been solved. And the truth? It's far from comforting. With this, we have come to the end of this video. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, do well to like, comment, and subscribe for more content. To enjoy more thrilling stories, click now on the following video that pops up on your screen.